Welcome to Bizarre Podcast.
There are many different types of curses. Cursed objects, like the Dybbuk box, a cursed doll, like Annabelle, and curses such as generational curses. This is a curse that does not only affect one particular person, but an entire family tree, following the bloodline of the family. Today's episode is about movie curses, and just like a generational curse, a movie curse can also follow a path and move down the cast and crew members involved in the film. The first title on my list is 1978's Superman the Movie. In 1978, the world believed a man could fly when Superman the Movie hit cinema screens. Directed by Richard Donner and starring Christopher Reeve as the Man of Steel. The movie tells the story of the last son of Krypton, Kal-El, who was sent by his Kryptonian parents to Earth to escape the fate of their doomed planet. Baby Kal-El crash lands in Smallville, Kansas, and is found by Martha and Jonathan Kent, who decide to bring him up as their own son and keep him safe. He eventually grows up to become the hero we all know and love, Superman, and battles with the mad genius Lex Luthor for the remainder of the movie. The movie became a massive success, and many more followed. But right from the beginning, many involved in the movie seemed to suffer in some way. The Superman franchise seemed to be cursed. The first victim, you could say, was director Richard Donner, who directed the first movie and a partial amount of the second. I say partial because he was filming Superman 1 and 2 side by side, but Donner was dismissed from the project due to disagreements between him and the studio. Also, the great Marlon Brando, who played Superman's Kryptonian father, also had a great deal of misfortune when in 1990 his son was sent to prison for shooting dead his sister's boyfriend. Brando spoke in court to try and save his son, but ultimately failed to do so, and went on living his life feeling like a failure. Although this was not the last of Brando's misfortunes. In 1995 his daughter committed suicide. After this, Brando became a recluse, and in July 2004, he passed away. Margot Kidder, who played Superman's love interest and strong-headed reporter Lois Lane, suffered a serious car crash that left her paralysed for a while, and her medical bills caused her to declare herself bankrupt. She also had bipolar disease, and in 1996 she went missing for several days, after losing many years of hard work, when a book she was writing disappeared from her hard drive on her PC after it was infected by a virus. This, she believes, triggered a mental breakdown, and she was later found in a paranoid, delusional state by the police. On May the 13th, 2018, Kidder died in a drug and alcohol overdose. Her death was ruled as suicide, although it's worth mentioning that Kidder never believed in the curse. Richard Pryor, who starred in Superman 3, also had a drug addiction and attempted suicide on more than one occasion. 3 years after the movie was finished, he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and he eventually died of a heart attack at the age of 65 in 2005. And the actor who played Superman as a baby at the beginning of the film, Lee Quigley, sadly died of solvent abuse in 1991 at the young age of 14. And of course, the man himself, Christopher Reeve, who played Superman in Superman the Movie, Superman 2, Superman 3, and finally Superman 4 The Quest for Peace, found it hard to find work after his role of Superman, as he was typecast and found it hard to find any leading roles in any movie. In 1995, Reeves took part in a cross-country equestrian riding event, and was tragically thrown from his horse and was paralysed from the waist down. In 2004, Christopher Reeve died of a heart failure due to his medical condition, and the world lost a hero in more ways than one. And sadly, in 2006, Dana Reeve, Christopher Reeve's wife, died of lung cancer, despite never smoking a cigarette in her life. Now, you might think everything mentioned so far is just a set of unfortunate circumstances, but it's also worth mentioning that a few other unfortunate events also revolve, not around the movie, but around the creation of Superman as a character. Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, the writer and artist who created Superman, who appeared in his first comic book in 1939, sold the rights to the character to DC for a very low amount. and as Superman's popularity seemed to skyrocket, the creators realised they had made a horrible mistake and spent most of their lives fighting to regain the rights to Superman and share the profit. Although they did eventually regain some of the wealth when Warner Creations granted the pair $20,000 a year plus health benefits in 1975, most of their lives were spent fighting and making ends meet. Next we have Max and Dave Fleischer, the creators of the Paramount Superman animated cartoons. The double act began to have disagreements and quarrel, causing their company to suffer financial difficulties and eventually closed down, leaving one of the brothers to die in poverty. And last is probably one of the more famous cases that is shrouded in mystery. It's the case of George Reeves, no relation to Christopher Reeve, who also starred as Superman from 1951 in the movie Superman and the Mole Men, which spawned a very popular TV series that spanned many seasons. But unfortunately George became to resent the character he played due to being typecast, and found it hard to find any leading roles in Hollywood. On June the 16th, 1959, days before his wedding, Reeves was found in his bedroom dead, due to a gunshot wound to his head. The death was ruled as a suicide, although his fingerprints were never found on the gun, which inspired many conspiracy theories that still to this day are speculated on. That was Superman. And next, Poltergeist. The movie Poltergeist is probably one of the scariest Hollywood movies ever made. The movie tells the story of the Freeling family, who start to experience strange goings on in their family home when a poltergeist starts to haunt them and inflict multiple horrors upon them, eventually sucking the youngest daughter Carol Ann, played by Heather O'Rourke, through a portal in her closet, and the family have to figure out how to rescue her from the other side. Before we get into the actual curse, I think it's worth mentioning the following. There's a famous scene in the movie where the mother of the family, played by Jo Beth Williams, is dragged into an unfinished pool in her garden. As she tries to escape the muddy rainwater that has built up in the hole, coffins and skeletons start to rise from the muddy wet ground underneath the water and surround the mother, who is terrified and trying to escape the gruesome dead faces that seem to be screaming at her. And this bit's shocking. It was later revealed that the skeletons were in fact real human remains that were bought at a cheaper price than it would have cost to buy fake ones. Many believe that this is the one reason that the Poltergeist curse started. And the first person to become the victim of the curse was Dominic Dunn, who played Dana, the older sister of the Freeling family. Dominic had broke off a relationship with her abusive boyfriend, who later returned to her home to beg her to take him back. When she refused, he became mad with rage and strangled her. She fell unconscious and then fell into a coma, and sadly later died. Her ex-boyfriend was sentenced to 6 years, but only did 3 of his sentence. And Heather O'Rourke, who played the young daughter Carol Ann in the film franchise, is one person most commonly said to be a victim of the Poltergeist curse. She'd been diagnosed with Crohn's disease, but that later was found out to be a mistake. O'Rourke actually had bowel obstruction that caused septic shock, which was mistaken for the flu, and treatment was not given in time, and tragically she died at the young age of 12 years old. Apparently there were a few other strange occurrences that happened on set and to the cast members, such as a mechanical clown malfunctioning and nearly strangling Oliver Robbins, who played the young boy Robbie in the movie. Jo Beth Williams also reported that when she returned home after a day's work on set, that all her pictures in her home had been tilted on the walls. Will Sampson, who played the Indian in the movie, refused to start work until he had blessed the set. Unfortunately, not long after, he died during an operation. Julian Beck, the actor who played the terrifying vicar in the second movie, looked like he was half dead, and the reason for this was not down to the makeup artist, but because the actor was actually suffering from stomach cancer, and unfortunately died shortly after filming was finished. Another actor named Lou Perryman, who had a small part in the original movie, died in 2009 when randomly a man named Seth Tatum knocked at his door and entered his home. Later the police found Perryman dead, chopped into bits. Seth Tatum had apparently had a psychotic breakdown, and out of all the homes he could have chosen, it was Perryman's door that he knocked on. And finally, Author of the story, James Caan, told on the night that he was finishing the book, a freak lightning bolt hit his property and caused the front cover of the air conditioning unit to fly off and hit him in the back. A minute later, all the lights flickered and went out completely, and when they came back on, all of the video games in the room started to play. Next on our list is a John Wayne movie named The Conqueror. The movie was considered a disappointing take on Genghis Khan, which was played by, you guessed it, John Wayne. The following years after the movie's completion, many of the cast and crew members passed away, and you're probably thinking this is nothing strange, but they all seem to have one thing in common: cancer. Director Dick Powell passed away from cancer 7 years after the movie's 1956 release. Actor Pedro Armendáriz was diagnosed with cancer in the early 60s, and a few years later committed suicide in 1963. Actress Agnes Moorehead passed away from cancer in 1974. Then Susan Hayward died in 1975 due to cancer, followed 4 years later by the star of the movie, John Wayne, who died of cancer in 1979. It turns out the movie was filmed in Utah, 150 miles away from the Nevada test site, where 11 nuclear bombs had been set off a year before. It is said that it was quite possible that all the radioactive dust could have travelled on the wind and settled where the movie was being filmed, and it's worth noting that the actors were constantly covered in dust. Also, when the movie required reshoots, quite a lot of the radioactive sand was shipped back to the studio set. It's rumoured that at least 91 members of the cast and crew were diagnosed with cancer, including some of the actors' children who developed problems later in life. Next on our list, The Omen. The Omen, starring Gregory Peck, was released in 1976 and tells the story of the Antichrist, who has taken the form of the young boy who inflicts terrible satanic horrors on all that meet him, including his mother, father and nanny. The movie was said to have had a lot of strange disasters whilst it was in production and just before. For instance, tragically, Gregory Peck's real-life son committed suicide before filming had started. Many say this was the start of the curse, and a series of terrible things followed, such as Gregory Peck's plane and a separate plane the producer was aboard was struck by lightning on its way to London. Also, a London hotel where the same producer was staying and some crew members was bombed by the IRA. A restaurant where the cast and crew were going to eat was also bombed by the IRA. Now, luckily the table was cancelled, so I'm not sure this should be regarded as part of the curse. But I could say the same for the next. A private jet was hired so the camera crew could get aerial shots for the movie, but it was postponed so a group of businessmen could use the jet, and the plane crashed on takeoff, killing everyone on board. Now, you could argue that this didn't affect the crew of the movie, so it can't be blamed on the curse of the movie. But it is unusual how all these things seem to tie in somehow with the movie. Also, strangely enough, a worker at the animal sanctuary where filming took place was killed by a tiger. Again, strange. But finally, the most remarkable event that took place was when special effects worker John Richardson was driving with his assistant in the passenger seat when his car was involved in a head-on collision. Richardson was injured, but unfortunately his assistant was tragically decapitated. Richardson stated that when he awoke in his vehicle, looking through dazed eyes, he could see a road sign in front of him, which showed the distance to the next town, which oddly enough was called Omen, spelled O-M-M-E-N, and the distance to the town, which in kilometres reads 6.66, and the number of the devil is 666. And finally, the last movie on my list is a film I'm sure you've all seen, or are too scared to see. The Exorcist. The Exorcist, the story of a young girl possessed by a demon, caused such an uproar upon its release in 1974 that the church wanted the movie banned.